Recently, I got into a discussion on this channel about how we can't call people in the ancient world gay or any other label within the LGBT community. You can see the video here, but long story short, the people in the ancient world did not have the vocabulary to describe themselves as gay. The word homosexual didn't appear in writing until the year 1869, and the correlation between the word homosexual and the mass popularity of using the word to describe oneself didn't take off until sometime in the mid to late 1900s. So basically, all that to say is you can't put the label homosexual on ancient people, as they would have no concept of this. This video is a follow-up to that, and it's going to focus on the homosexual and LGBT community at large. So basically, people who aren't straight. And note, when I say LGBT, I mean that everyone that's included under that label. I know that there are longer acronyms to be more inclusive. We're just going to pretend that this is a longer acronym. I'm just using this for brevity. As another note, I think everything that I'm saying in regards to talking about homosexuality in the LGBT community, I think it can also apply to mental health and the openness that we're seeing about it in society at large today. So, going back to the video on ancient people, it got me thinking that we do have the words to describe ourselves in the modern day, if that's how we want to describe ourselves, be it in the LGBT community or otherwise. As such, we shouldn't necessarily see the rise in people calling themselves gay as a rise, but as a reflection of the natural state of people's dispositions. It's just that now we have words, and words that are accepted in their common understanding across global society, to better reflect our inner selves. As a parallel, and stay with me here, I believe that this is in the same way that we see the rise in violence in our society. It is so incredibly easy to see violence. Pull out your phone, go to the news. If you didn't know anybody, you might say the world's going mad. The average person that's alive right now has more access to global violence than ever before in all of human history. Since the invention of the photograph, video, radio, humanity has had a more visceral relationship with violence, far away from themselves than ever before. And it can lead some to think that there's more violence today than there ever has been. And yeah, there's violence today. There's a war in Ukraine. There's mass shootings in the United States. And there's other acts of violence that you can just go find online that are just unspeakable. All that being said, humanity is going through one of its least violent periods in history. We can always work to lower the amounts of violence, and we absolutely should, but it doesn't detract from the fact that humanity has more ways of capturing violence and disseminating it to the masses than ever before in human history. Now, you might think that I'm arguing against myself here, where I'm talking about how we can see more violence, but there's actually less of it happening. But let's take a step back. If the people in the Mongol Empire had TikTok and the Romans had LiveLeak, we would see violence on a scale that is unprecedented today. In Rome, we'd see crucifixions and gladiatorial combat at the Colosseum. And that's not to mention the wars and genocides that are perpetrated by Rome. In the Mongol armies, we would see thousands of soldiers after capturing their enemies, each Mongol soldier taking 8 to 10 prisoners and at a command, tying them up and beheading them one by one. And if we gave the Native Americans Twitter, we could see the disease spread through their society after contact with the old world. And we could watch 175 million Native Americans killed by disease and conquest. And if we're going to do some quick math, that is 90% of the native population dying between 1492 and right now. Simply put, if we gave our ancestors the same tools that we have now to document and record violence, we would see that right now is relatively peaceful. But that's not what happened, because right now is when we have access to the tools to document violence. We're just able to see more of it than they ever could. In the same way, if we're able to explain the concept of homosexuality or LGBT to our ancestors, they'd probably understand it. And furthermore, we'd probably, assuming there is a societal acceptance and vocabulary disseminated across the ancient world, we'd probably see comparable numbers of people identifying with it as we do today. That being said, I'm going to stay away from speculative history and move into my own opinions about the here and now. So, just because we have a word to describe ourselves, that doesn't automatically mean that millions of people across the world are going to start identifying with it and start some new global movement because of it. It took around 100 years for the word homosexual to really gain traction, and only now are we seeing a true flowering of people widely using it across the world. This is because, in my opinion, the use of a word to describe oneself and the social acceptance of what you're describing yourself as go hand in hand. The more popular, or at least socially tolerated it is to be homosexual, then the more people will describe themselves as homosexual. This is also why I think that we're seeing the preponderance of people that are within the LGBT community are also within the younger generations of society. This is because the younger generation is more likely to accept someone as being gay or otherwise not conforming to the standard of being a straight person as set forth by the older generations of society. Now, none of this is to say that all old people are bigots and all young people are the patron saints of tolerance. There's obviously nuance and gray areas to be found. But basically, right now, we're living in just the right time to not only have the vocabulary to describe oneself, but also the social acceptance to back it up. We can actually look into history and place this into context. There was a time, and I'm sure there are many more, I'm just going to use this example, where being gay was socially accepted, but the vocabulary wasn't there. And I talked about this in my last video, shameless plug. We're going to look here at Babur, and he was the first king of the Mughal Empire. Basically, he fell in love with a camp boy. And that being said, while nobody in society batted an eye at this, Babur did not have the vocabulary to express his feelings the way that we do today. The word homosexual simply didn't exist back then, nor did the concept of the LGBT community. On the other side of the coin, we can look at a time where being gay was not socially accepted, but the terminology was there. The Lavender Scare was a facet of the Red Scare during the Cold War. The gist, and I'm super oversimplifying here, is that some people in the United States thought that being gay made somebody more susceptible to becoming a communist, and as such, homosexual people were dismissed from the US government en masse. So right now, we have both the broad societal tolerance of the LGBT community, as well as the vocabulary to describe oneself as LGBT. What a time to be alive. One thing I'd like to end on is that don't take that for granted no matter where you fall on your tolerance of LGBT, and here's why. 1. In the future, people will think of our vocabulary as limited. Just like we think of our ancestors' vocabulary as limited sometimes, our future grandkids and their grandkids are going to look back at us and be like, yeah, their vocabulary was pretty limited. So our ability to describe ourselves as homosexual within the LGBT community will be a linguistic stepping stone for people in the future to better and more accurately describe themselves. So all that to say is you're living in linguistic history. And 2, the ability to describe ourselves as homosexual, in addition to having the societal tolerance, is by no means a given. I've just given 2 examples of times where in the past you had one but not the other. As such, not only should you cherish having both at the same time, but you should do what you can to ensure that future generations have the ability, linguistically and socially, to describe themselves as they see fit. Well, that just about wraps it up. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on homosexuality in the modern world, so thank you very much for watching. As with all my videos, this is just my opinion, so please feel free to research this on your own. One last opinion that I'll give, and I kind of brushed on it earlier, but as Americans, I believe it is our civic duty to protect the ability of those around us to choose, and in this case, choose whether to be part of the LGBT community or not. Additionally, I do think that aspects of this discussion apply to mental health as well, so maybe in the future, I'll make a video about social tolerance and mental health. Anyways, that's it with me, so I'll be hitting the old dusty trail for now. So until next time, happy Intellectual Tuesday, and I'll see you around.